Hello, and welcome back to the Lord of the Rings. Or, well, the Tolkien universe. Not quite the Lord of the Rings yet. We're still in the Silmarillion, almost about halfway. And today we're going to be reading Chapter 16 of Maeglin. We'll give it a minute or two to see who hops in to join us, and then we'll get started. And today we have Bob hanging out. Let's see if I can... Where is he? There's the boy. Say hi. Do you say hi? Say no. I don't say hi. Oh, now the camera's falling. Hello, Willow, Cygnus. There we go. Hey, Jeff. Alright, let's, I gotta change my settings before I forget. Let's see here. There it is. Bob, you're purring so loud. Are you excited for stream? Are you gonna sit on my lap again? Come on. Hello. Hello, kitty. Let's see. How's everybody doing? Hey, Gerard. Oh, you're writing your own book, Willow? Nice. I, too, have been writing books. I mean, I've published the 2 nonfiction, but I've been writing my own fiction for many, many years, and I think I'm eventually finally getting around to finishing something with it. We'll see. Hello, Akatsuki. I feel a lot of kinship with Tolkien in that I feel like a lot of my writings are just creating a universe that I've never quite finished anything with. He was constantly just creating and reworking and reimagining his stories. And of all the stories he wrote, in his lifetime, he only published 4 books, as far as I'm, well, 4 in his universe. He translated and did a lot of other work, but anyway, as I said earlier, today is chapter 16. It's a love story. A horrible love story, if it's the one I'm remembering. It's about Maeglin, who's a great guy. You're definitely gonna love him. This is another kind of side story. You know, we've been talking about all these wars and all these kingdoms that are being created. While all that's happening, other characters are also, you know, living their own lives, having things happen. Hello, Phil. So the last chapter, let's see, was it Turgon? Yes, Turgon, I believe, ran off and made his own kingdom. And built Gondolin, that's what it was. And I believe this story is going to center around Gondolin, if I remember correctly. But, hello, Nacho, welcome. Aredhel Arfeniel, the White Lady of the Noldor, daughter of Fingolfin, dwelt in Nevrast with Turgon her brother, and she went with him to the Hidden Kingdom. But she wearied of the guarded city of Gondolin, desiring ever the longer the more to ride again in the wide lands and to walk in the forests, as had been her wont in Valinor. And when 200 years had passed since Gondolin was full wrought, she spoke to Turgon and asked leave to depart. Turgon was loath to grant this, and long denied her. But at the last he yielded, saying, "Go then, if you will, though it is against my wisdom, and I forebode that ill will come of it both to you and to me. But you shall go to seek Fingon, our brother, and those that I send with you shall return hither to Gondolin as swiftly as they may." Hello, Bro Moment. Hello, Lobsel. This is a really great line. But Aredhel said, "I am your sister and not your servant, and beyond your bounds I will go as seems good to me, and if you begrudge me an escort, then I will go alone." So, last time, Turgon, big elf guy, built his own secret town, his own secret city, because he wanted to build a city. And also, shit's bad. You know, he sees that things are bad, and so he hides his family away in this secret city. But his sister loves forests and exploring and being free, and she's, like, bored to tears in this castle town. And so after 200 years of staying where she's been told to stay, she's like, "Listen, bro, I am so bored! Let me go outside!" And he's like, well, I don't think this is gonna end well. And as much as I agree with her in wanting to go and run and be free, he's right, it's going to end badly. Turgon answered, I grudge you nothing that I have, yet I desire that none shall dwell beyond my walls who know the way hither, and if I trust you, my sister, others I trust less to keep guard on their tongues. It's not so much he wants to keep her imprisoned, he just wants the town to remain a secret, because that's the only way to protect everybody. Turgon appointed 3 lords of his household to ride with Eredhel, and he bade them lead her to Fingon in Hithlum, if they might prevail upon her. And be wary, he said, for though Morgoth be yet hemmed in the north, there are many perils in Middle-earth of which the lady knows nothing. Then Eredhel departed from Gondolin, and Turgon's heart was heavy at her going. But when she came to the ford of Brithiac and the river Sirion, she said to her companions, Turn now south and not north, for I will not ride to Hithlum. My heart desires rather to find the sons of Fëanor, my friends of old. Ah, the sons of Fëanor, who always are very smart and never do anything bad. And since she could not be dissuaded, they turned south as she commanded and sought admittance into Doriath. But the march wardens denied them, for Thingol would suffer none of the Noldor to pass the girdle, save his kinsfolk of the house of Finarfin, and least of all those who were friends of the sons of Fëanor. Remember, that's the king last time who found out about what they did with the burning the ships and the murdering the people, and he's like, fuck all y'all. I don't like you. So now his kingdom is sealed off to them. Therefore the march wardens said to Eredhel, To the land of Celegorm for which you seek, lady, you may by no means pass through the realm of King Thingol. You must ride beyond the girdle of Melian to the south or the north. The speediest way is by the paths that lead east from the Brithiac through Dimbar and along the north march of this kingdom until you pass the bridge of Esgalduin and the ford of Eros and come to the lands that lie beyond the hill of Himring. There dwell, as we believe, Celegorm and Carufin, and it may be that you will find them, but the road is perilous. Oh, so many things could have gone differently if they'd just opened the city gate. Eredhel turned back and sought the dangerous road between the haunted valleys of Ered Gorgoroth and the north fences of Doriath, and as they drew near to the evil region of Nan Dungorthab, the riders became enmeshed in shadows, and Eredhel strayed from her companions and was lost. I thought the king just banned their language. He did that too, but if you're loyal to Fëanor and to the folks that did those crimes, he doesn't like you and he's not going to let you in. And because Eredhel is literally here to look for Fëanor and them, well, Fëanor's kids, you know, she's still loyal to her friends, and he's like, I don't like your friends, you can't come in, you know. Unfortunately, it's just not good luck that she still likes them and the king does not, so she is now in trouble. As they drew near, they became enmeshed in shadow, and Eredhel strayed from her companions and was lost. They sought long for her in vain, fearing she had been ensnared or had drunk from the poisoned streams of that land. But the fell creatures of Ungoliant that dwelt in the ravines were roused and pursued them, and they hardly escaped with their lives. When at last they returned and their tale was told, there was great sorrow in Gondolin, and Turgon sat long alone, enduring grief and anger in silence. But Eredhel, having sought in vain of her companions, rode on, for she was fearless and hardy of heart, as were all the children of Finwë. And she held on her way, and crossing Esgalduin and Eros, came to the land of Himlad, between Eros and Selen, where Celegorm and Carufin dwelt in those days, before the breaking of the siege of Angband. At the time they were from home, riding with Caranthir east in Thargelion, but the people of Celegorm welcomed her and bade her stay among them with honor until their lord's return. There for a while she was content and had great joy in wandering free in the woodlands. But as the year lengthened and Celegorm did not return, she became restless again, and took to riding alone ever further abroad, seeking for new paths and untrodden glades. I love this character. This girl, everybody back home thinks she's dead, and you can't send a letter to a secret kingdom, you know? And her answer is, okay, I'm gonna chill out here. I like it here. It's nice. I'm gonna ride my horse. I'm gonna go on adventures. I'm gonna wait for this elf to show up so I can make friends. Oh, it's been months and he's not here? Okay, bye! I'm bored. I'm gonna go ride my horse this way. She's just so great. I love it. Let's see. Thus it chanced that in the waning of the year, a red hell came to the south of Himlad, and passed over Kellen, and before she was aware, she was enmeshed in Nan Elmoth. In that wood, in ages past, Melian walked in the twilight of Middle-earth when the trees were young, and enchantment lay upon it still. But now the trees of Nan Elmoth were the tallest and darkest in all Beleriand, and there the sun never came, and there Eol dwelt, who was named the Dark Elf. Of old he was of the kin of Thingol, but he was restless and ill at ease in Doriath. And when the girdle of Melian was set about the forest region where he dwelt, he fled thence to Nan Elmoth. There he lived in deep shadow, loving the night and the twilight under the stars. He shunned the Noldor, holding them to blame for the return of Morgoth, to trouble the quiet of Beleriand. But for the dwarves he had more liking than any of the other elven folk of old. From him the dwarves learned much of what had passed in the lands of the Eldar. Now the traffic of the dwarves down from the Blue Mountains followed two roads across East Beleriand and the Northern Way, going towards the fords of Eros, past nigh to Nan Elmoth, and there Eol would meet the Naugrim, his dwarves, and hold converse with them. And as their friendship grew, he would at times go and dwell as a guest in the deep mansions of Nogrod or Belagost. There he learned much of metalwork, and came to great skill therein. And he devised a metal as hard as the steel of the dwarves, but so malleable he could make it thin and supple, and yet it remained resilient to all blades and darts. He named it Galvorn, for it was black and shining like jet, and he was clad in it whenever he went abroad. But Eol, though stooped by his smithwork, was no dwarf, but a tall elf of a high kin of the Teleri, noble though grim of face, and his eyes could see deep into shadows and dark places. So, this is a elf that lives on his own in an enchanted forest. He wears all black armor. He's tall and handsome, but a metal worker who's only friends with the dwarves. He's a very, very interesting figure physically. It came to pass he saw a red hell, Arfiniel, as she strayed among the tall trees near the borders of Nan Elmoth, a gleam of white in the dim land. Very fair she seemed to him, and he desired her, and he set his enchantments about her so she could not find the ways out, but drew ever nearer to his dwelling in the depths of the wood. There were his smithy and his dim halls, and such servants as he had, silent and secret as their master. And when a red hell, weary with wandering, came at last to his doors, he revealed himself, and he welcomed her, and led her into his house. And there she remained, for Eol took her to wife, and it was long ere any of her kin heard of her again. So this is kind of a sad turn. She's not necessarily unhappy here, and it's not like he forced her to marry him or whatever, but he did manipulate the situation so that she had to meet him, and she does not know that, because he saw her in the forest and used magic to make sure that she didn't leave the woods. She made it to his house. So he's a very sneaky figure. Not necessarily well-intentioned, but not entirely evil. He's a gray moral figure. And a red hill, I think, to some extent does love him, but it does not, if I remember correctly, end up being a happy marriage. It is not said a red hell was wholly unwilling, nor that her life in Nan Elmoth was hateful to her for many years. For though at Eol's command she must shun the sunlight, they wandered far together under the stars, or by the light of the sickle moon. Or she might fare alone as she would, save that Eol forbade her to seek the sons of Fëanor or any others of the Noldor. And a red hell bore to Eol a son in the shadows of Nan Elmoth, and in her heart she gave him a name in the forbidden tongue of the Noldor, Lomian, that signifies child of the twilight. But his father gave him no name until he was 12 years old. Then he called him Maeglin, which is sharp glance, for he perceived that the eyes of his son were more piercing than his own, and his thought could read the secrets of hearts beyond the mist of words. As Maeglin grew to full stature, he resembled in face and form rather his kindred of the Noldor, but in mood and mind he was the son of his father. His words were few, save in matters that touched him near, and then his voice had a power to move those that heard him, and to overthrow those that withstood him. He was tall and black-haired, his eyes were dark, yet bright and keen as the eyes of the Noldor, and his skin was white. Oft he went with Eol to the cities of the dwarves in the east of Arid Linden, and there he learned eagerly what they would teach, and above all the craft of finding the ores of metals in the mountains. This is the first age. There are only 2 happy marriages, and one of them is the author's. I'm curious which other marriage you consider the happy one. Thingol and Melian, I suppose? I mean, I'm relatively sure theirs ends tragically too, but they are definitely happily married. The happiest marriages are always started by tricksy forest magics. Oh, of course. That's how everybody gets together in magic lands. It is said that Maeglin loved his mother better, and if Eol were abroad, he would sit long beside her and listen to all she could tell him of her kin and their deeds in Eldamar, and of the might and valor of the princes of the house of Fingolfin. All these things he laid to heart, but most of all that which he heard of Turgon, and that he had no heir. For Elenwe his wife perished in the crossing of the Helcraxare, and his daughter Idril Celebridahl was his only child. So he has an heir. It's just a girl. Yay. In the telling of these tales that were awakened in Eredhel, a desire to see her own kin again, and she marveled she had grown weary of the light of Gondolin, and the fountains in the sun, and the green sward of Tumladen under the windy skies of spring. Moreover, she was often alone in the shadows when both her son and her husband were away. Of these tales also grew the first quarrels of Maeglin and Eol, for by no means would his mother reveal to Maeglin where Turgon dwelt, nor by what means one might come thither, and he bided his time, trusting yet to wheedle the secret from her, or perhaps to read her unguarded mind. But ere that could be done, he desired to look on the Noldor and speak with the sons of Fëanor, his kin, that dwelt not far away. But when he declared his purpose to Eol, his father was wrathful. "You are of the house of Eol, Maeglin, my son," he said, "and not of the Galoldrim. All this land is the land of the Teleri, and I will not have my son deal with the slayers of our kin, the invaders and usurpers of our homes. In this you shall obey me, or I will set you in bonds." And Maeglin did not answer, but was cold and silent, and went abroad no more with Eol, and Eol mistrusted him. Okay, so the reason for his anger. Eol is one of the Teleri, which means the elves that chill, well, they were the biggest group and had the most divisions. In general, they were the sea elves. They liked the ocean. When the Noldor crossed the ocean to get to Middle-earth, they killed a bunch of Teleri at the ship bay to steal their boats. So they stole boats, they killed Teleri. So that's what he's referring to, that his cousins across the sea had been attacked and betrayed by the Noldor, and that's why he doesn't want his son to hang out with them, which, fair. That's an honest parenting decision, really. It came to pass that at the midsummer, the dwarves, as was their custom, bade Eol to a feast in Nogrod, and he rode away. Now Maeglin and his mother were free for a while to go where they wished, and they rode often to the eaves of the woods, seeking the sunlight. And desire grew hot in Maeglin's heart to leave Nan Elmoth forever. Therefore he said to Eredhel, "Lady, let us depart while there is still time. What hope is there in this wood for you or for me? Here we are held in bondage, and no profit shall I find here. For I have learned all that my father has to teach, or that the Nalgrim will reveal to me. Shall we not seek for Gondolin? You shall be my guide, and I will be your guard." Then Eredhel was glad, and looked upon her son with pride. And telling the servants of Eol that they went to seek the sons of Fëanor, they departed and rode away to the north eaves of Nan Elmoth. There they crossed the slender stream of Silon into the land of Himlad, and rode on to the fords of Eros, and so westward along the fences of Doriath. I missed the reference Baron and Luthien that was Tolkien's nickname for himself and his wife. Aw, I didn't realize that. Aw. He really does have a human elf fetish, which honestly, don't we all? Don't we all have a interspecies immortal and mortal magic and non-magic fetish? I feel like that's very common. Let's see here. Now Eol returned out of the east sooner than Maeglin had foreseen, and found his wife and son 2 days gone. And so great was his anger that he followed them even by the light of day. As he entered the Himlad, he mastered his wrath and went warily, remembering his danger. For Celegorm and Carufin were mighty lords who loved Eol not at all, and Carufin, moreover, was a perilous mood. Celegorm and Carufin are two of the asshole brothers anyway, so no wonder don't like them. The scouts of Maeglin had marked the riding of Maeglin and Eredhel to the ford of Eros, and Carufin perceived the strange deeds were afoot, came south from the pass and encamped near the fords. And before Eol had ridden far across the Himlad, he was waylaid by the riders of Carufin and taken to their lord. Then Carufin said to Eol, "What errand have you, dark elf, in my lands? An urgent matter, perhaps, that keeps one so sun-shy abroad by day?" And Eol, knowing his peril, restrained the bitter words that arose in his mind. "I have learned, Lord Carufin," he said, "that my son and my wife, the White Lady of Gondolin, have ridden to visit you while I was from home, and it seemed to me fitting that I should join them on this errand." Then Carufin laughed at Eol and said, "They might have found their welcome here less warm than they hoped, had you accompanied them. But it is no matter, for that was not their errand. It is not 2 days since they passed over the Erosiak, and thence rode swiftly westward. It seems that you would deceive me, unless, indeed, you yourself have been deceived." And Eol answered, "Then, Lord, perhaps you will give me leave to go and discover the truth of this matter." "You have my leave, but not my love," said Carufin. "The sooner you depart from my land, the better it will please me." What a thing to say. I'm gonna say that to people now when they're, like, leaving my house. "You have my leave, but not my love." "The sooner you depart from my land, the better it will please me." Oh, man. Really, Eol is the goth elf. They've already said he dresses in all black armor, he hides in an enchanted forest, and he avoids the sun. And he only hangs out with the dwarves, because, you know, he's too cool for elves. Eol mounted his horse, saying, "It is good, Lord Carufin, to find a kinsman thus kindly at need. I will remember it when I return." See, okay, in all instances besides Eredhel, Eol's not being a dick. Carufin and Celegorm murdered his family, so his behavior with them makes sense. You know, manipulating things so that Eredhel would find him and marry him, not as cool. Though, it doesn't really say that he forced... The whole situation is suspicious. I always kind of imagined that Eredhel eventually figured out how she ended up at the house, and that probably soured their relationship. Because spending that many years with him, she had to have figured out he had magic and had control over the forest. Carufin looked darkly upon Eol. "Do not flaunt that title of your wife before me," he said. "For those who steal the daughters of the Noldor and wed them without gift or leave do not gain kinship with their kin. I have given you leave to go. Take it and be gone. By the laws of the Eldar, I may not slay you at this time, and this counsel I add. Return now to your dwelling in the darkness of Nan Elmoth, for my heart warns me that if you now pursue those who love you no more, never will you return thither." Then Eol rode off in haste, and he was filled with hatred of all the Noldor, for he perceived now that Maeglin and Eredhel were fleeing to Gondolin, and driven by anger and the shame of his humiliation, he crossed the fords of Eros, and rode hard upon the way they had gone before. But though they knew not when he followed him, though they knew not that he had followed them, and he had the swiftest steed, he never came in sight of them until they reached the Brithiek and abandoned their horses. Then, by ill fate, they were betrayed, for the horses neighed loudly, and Eol's steed heard them and sped towards them. And Eol saw from afar the white raiment of Eredhel and marked which way she went, seeking the secret path into the mountains. Now Eredhel and Maeglin came to the outer gate of Gondolin and the dark guard under the mountains, and there she was received with joy. Passing through the 7 gates, she came with Maeglin to Turgon upon Amon Gwareth. Then the king listened with wonder to all that Eredhel had to tell, and he looked with liking upon Maeglin, his sister son, seeing in him one worthy to be accounted among the princes of the Noldor. I rejoice indeed that our Finial has returned to Gondolin, he said, and now more fair again shall my city seem than in the days when I deemed her loss. And Maeglin shall have the highest honor in my realm. Then Maeglin bowed low and took Turgon for lord and king to do all his will. But thereafter he stood silent and watchful, for the bliss and splendor of Gondolin surpassed all he had imagined from the tales of his mother, and he was amazed by the strength of the city and the hosts of its people, and the many things strange and beautiful he beheld. Yet to none were his eyes more often drawn than to Idril, the king's daughter, who sat beside him, for she was as golden as the Vanyar, her mother's kindred, and she seemed to him as the sun from which all the kingdom's halls drew its light. Oh boy. Somebody's fallen in love with their cousin again. But Eol, following after Eredhel, found the dry river and the secret path, and so creeping in by stealth, he came to the guard and was taken and questioned. And when the guard heard he claimed Eredhel as wife, they were amazed, and sent a swift messenger to the city, and he came to the king's hall. Lord, he cried, the guard have taken captive one that came by stealth to the dark gate. Eol he names himself, and he is a tall elf, dark and grim, of the kindred of the Sindar. Yet he claims the Lady Eredhel as his wife, and demands to be brought before you. His wrath is great, and he is hard to restrain, but we have not slain him as your law commands. Then Eredhel said, Alas, Eol has followed us, even as I feared. But with great stealth was it done, for we saw and heard no pursuit as we entered upon the hidden way. Then she said to the messenger, He speaks but the truth. He is Eol, and I am his wife, and he is the father of my son. Slay him not, but lead him hither to the king's judgment, if the king so wills. I do like that she's the one that gets to decide his fate. Say, you know what, don't kill him, bring him to the king, because it is her husband. And so it was done, and Eol was brought to Turgon's hall and stood before his high seat, proud and sullen. Though he was amazed no less than his son at all he saw, his heart was filled the more with anger and with hate of the Noldor. But Turgon treated him with honor, and rose up and would take his hand, and he said, Welcome, kinsman, for I so hold you. Here you shall dwell at your pleasure, save only that you must here abide, and depart not from my kingdom. For it is my law that none who find the way hither shall depart. But Eol withdrew his hand. I acknowledge not your law, he said. No right have you or any of your kin in this land to seize realms or set bounds, either here or there. This is the land of the Teleri, to which you bring war and all unquiet, dealing ever proudly and unjustly. I care nothing for your secrets, and I came not to spy upon you, but to claim my own, my wife and my son. Yet if Eredhel your sister you have some claim, then let her remain. Let the bird go back to the cage, where soon she will sicken again as she sickened before. But not so, Maeglin. My son you shall not withhold from me. Come, Maeglin, son of Eol, your father commands you. Leave the house of his enemies and the slayers of his kin, or be accursed. But Maeglin answered nothing. Again, I don't think he's entirely wrong in this situation. In his eyes, there was no war until the Noldor came. There were no troubles. The Noldor murdered his cousins. They have claimed land that didn't belong to them. I mean, nobody was living in this secret cave, but he's got a point. And he also says, hey, if my wife doesn't want to come back and she's happy here, let her do whatever she wants, but I'm here for my kid. Which, they don't specify, I think, how old he is here. I get the impression he's not an adult, but that's a little iffy with elves anyway. Then Turgon sat in his high seat, holding his staff of doom, and in a stern voice spoke, I will not debate with you, dark elf. By the swords of the Noldor alone are your sunless woods defended. Your freedom to wander there wild you owe to my kin, and but for them, long since, you would have labored in thraldom in the pits of Angband. He's also not wrong. And here I am king, and whether you will it or will not, my doom is law. This choice only is given to you, to abide here or to die here, and so also for your son. Then Eol looked into the eyes of King Turgon, and he was not daunted, but stood long without word or movement, while a still silence fell upon the hall. and Eredhel was afraid, knowing that he was perilous. Suddenly, swift as a serpent, he seized a javelin that he hid beneath his cloak and cast it at Maeglin, crying, "The second choice I take, and for my son also. You shall not hold what is mine." But Eredhel sprang before the dart, and it smote her in the shoulder. And Eol was overborne by many and set in bonds and led away, while others tended Eredhel. But Maeglin, looking upon his father, was silent. Dad of the Year! It's a great dad. It was appointed that Eol should be brought the next day to the king's judgment, and Eredhel and Idril moved Turgon to mercy. But in the evening Eredhel sickened, and though the wound had seemed little, she fell into the darkness, and in the night she died. For the point of the javelin was poison, though none knew it until too late. Therefore, when Eol was brought before Turgon, he found no mercy, and they led him forth to the Caragdur, a precipice of black rock upon the north side of the hill of Gondolin, there to cast him down from the sheer walls of the city. And Maeglin stood by and said nothing, but at last Eol cried out, "So you forsake your father and his kin, ill-gotten son. Here shall you fail of all your hopes, and may you yet die the same death as I." Then they cast Eol over the Caragdur, and so he ended, and to all in Gondolin it seemed just. But Idril was troubled, and from that day she mistrusted her kinsmen. But Maeglin prospered and grew great among the Galadriel, praised by all, and high in the favor of Turgon. For if he would learn eagerly and swiftly all he might, he also had much to teach. And he gathered about him all such as had the most bent to smithcraft and mining. And he sought in the Icoriath, which are the encircling mountains, and found rich loads of ore of divers metals. Most he prized the hard iron of the mine of Anghabar, in the north of the Icoriath, and thence he got a wealth of forged metal and of steel, so that the arms of the this is so much fun, Gondolindrim, which means Elves of Gondolin, were made ever stronger and more keen, and that stood them in good stead in the days to come. Wise in counsel was Maeglin, and wary, and yet hardy and valiant as needed. And then that was seen in after days, for when in the dread year of the Nirnaeth Arnoediad. Fancy word for a big battle that's gonna happen soon. Yeah, I don't know what the Staff of Doom is. I don't know what that refers to, but apparently Turgon has a Staff of Doom. Turgon opened his leaguer and marched forth to the help of Fingon in the north. Maeglin would not remain in Gondolin as regent of the king, but went to the war and fought beside Turgon, and proved fell and fearless in battle. Thus all seemed well with the fortunes of Maeglin, who had risen to be mighty among the princes of the Noldor, and greatest save one in the most renowned of their realms. Yet he did not reveal his heart, and though not all things went as he would, he endured it in silence, hiding his mind so few could read it, unless it was Idril Calinbrindal. For from his first days in Gondolin he had borne a grief ever worsening that robbed him of all joy. He loved the beauty of Idril and desired her without hope. The Eldar wedded not with kin so near, nor ever before had any desired to do so. And however that might be, Idril loved Maeglin not at all, and knowing his thought of her, she loved him the less. For it seemed to her a thing strange and crooked in him, as indeed the Eldar ever since have deemed it, an evil fruit of the kinslaying, whereby the shadow of the curse of Mandros fell upon the last hope of the Noldor. But as the years passed, still Maeglin watched Idril and waited, and his love turned to darkness in his heart, and he sought the more to have his will in other matters, shirking no toil or burden, if he might thereby have power. Thus it was in Gondolin, amid all the bliss of that realm, while its glory lasted, a dark seed of evil was sown. Ooh. So Princess runs away and goes on an adventure and gets kind of kidnapped by a dark elf, has a kid, manages to get away and come back home with the kid, but the kid's a bad seed. Alright, that was chapter 16 of Maeglin, which will not be the end of his story by any means. It's really the beginning, but the rest of his tale will not be dealt with until other things happen down the line. We're taking another turn into the coming of the men into the West, which I believe is going to explain the very first human men. I think maybe it was mentioned earlier that they had been created, but they hadn't been, chapter of men. I don't think they had been named and gone into detail quite yet. Yeah, okay, here, of men explains some of it. We're gonna go into more detail about them now in chapter 17. What's this green goo I'm drinking? This is my magic potion. Also called green machine. It's a fruit vegetable mix for people with health problems. It helps my thyroid. It's delicious. Chapter 17 of the Coming of Men into the West. When 300 years and more were gone since the Noldor came to Beleriand, in the days of the Long Peace, Finrod Felagund, Lord of Nargothrond, journeyed east of Sirion and went hunting with Maeglor and Maedhros, sons of Fëanor. But he wearied of the chase and passed on alone toward the mountains of Ered Lindon that he saw shining afar. And taking the dwarf road, he crossed Gellion at the ford of Sarn Athrod, and turning south over the upper streams of Askar, he came into the north of Osiriand. In a valley among the foothills of the mountains, below the springs of Thalos, he saw lights in the evening, and far off he heard the sound of song. At this he wondered much, for the green elves of that land lit no fires, nor did they sing by night. At first he feared that a raid of orcs had passed the leaguer of the north, but as he drew near he perceived it was not so, for the singers used a tongue that he had not heard before, neither that of dwarves nor of orcs. Then Felagund, standing silent in the night shadow of the trees, looked down into the camp, and there he beheld a strange people. Now these were part of the kindred and following of Beor of old, as he was afterwards called, a chieftain among men. After many lives of wandering out of the east, he led them at last over the Blue Mountains, the first of the race of men to enter Beleriand, and they sang because they were glad, and believed they had escaped from perils, and had come at last to a land without fear. Long Felagund watched them, and love for them stirred in his heart, but he remained hidden in the trees until they had all fallen asleep. Then he went among the sleeping people, and sat beside their dying fire where none kept watch, and he took up a rude harp which Beor had laid aside, and he played music upon it such as the ears of men had not heard, for they had as yet no teachers in the arts, save only the dark elves in the wild lands. Trust a elf to be so extra that he waits for all the men to go to sleep, and then walks silently into the middle of them and sits down by the fire and plays a song to wake them up to be the most... to have the greatest entrance. He can't just walk up and say hi. Now men awoke and listened to Felagund as he harped and sang, and each thought he was in some fair dream, until he saw that his fellows were awake also beside him, but they did not speak or stir while Felagund still played, because of the beauty of the music and the wonder of the song. Wisdom was in the words of the elven king, and the hearts grew wiser that hearkened to him, for the things of which he sang, of the making of Arda and the bliss of Aman beyond the shadows of the sea, came as clear visions before their eyes, and his elvish speech was interpreted in each mind according to its measure. Thus it was that men called King Felagund, whom they met first of all the Eldar, Nom, that is wisdom in the language of that people, and after him they named his folk Nomin the Wise. Indeed, they believed at first that Felagund was one of the Valar, of whom they'd heard rumor when they dwelt far in the west, and this was, some say, the cause of their journeying. But Felagund dwelt among them and taught them true knowledge, and they loved him, and took him for their lord, and they were ever after loyal to the house of Finarfin. He taught them true knowledge as opposed to false knowledge. Now the Eldar were beyond all other people skilled in tongues, and Felagund discovered also he could read the minds of men, such thoughts as they wished to reveal in speech, so that their words were easily interpreted. It is also said that these men had long had dealings with the dark elves east of the mountains, and from them had learned much of their speech. And since all the languages of the Quendi were of one origin, the language of Beor and his folks resembled the elven tongue in many words and devices. It was not long, therefore, before Felagund could hold converse with Beor, and while he dwelt with them they spoke much together. But when he questioned him concerning the arising of men and their journeys, Beor would say little, and indeed he knew little, for the fathers of his people had told few tales of their past, and a silence had fallen upon their memory. A darkness lies behind us, Beor said, and we have turned our backs upon it, and we do not desire to return thither even in thought. Westwards our hearts have been turned, and we believe that there we shall find light. But it was said afterwards among the Eldar that when men awoke in Hildorian at the rising of the sun, the spies of Morgoth were watchful, and tidings were soon brought to him. And this seemed to him so great a matter that secretly under shadow he himself departed from Angband, and went forth into Middle-earth, leaving to Sauron the command of the war. Of his dealings with men the Eldar indeed knew nothing, but at that time and learnt but little afterwards. But that a darkness lay upon the hearts of men, as the shadow of the kinslaying and the doom of Mandos lay upon the Noldor, they perceived clearly, even in the people of the elf friends whom they first knew. To corrupt or destroy whatsoever arose new and fair was ever the chief desire of Morgoth, and doubtless he had this purpose also in his errand, by fear and lies to make men the foes of the Eldar, and bring them up out of the east against Beleriand. So in other words, the men don't remember where they came from, where the elves all remember they woke up by that lake and the gods said, hey, and around. The men don't remember, but when they were first created, Morgoth found out about it and went over there and probably did some bad shit. And so now there's this kind of shadow over them that feels ominous, in a similar way that the Noldor have the curse the gods laid upon them. But this design was slow to ripen and was never wholly achieved, for men, it is said, were at first few in number, whereas Morgoth grew afraid of the growing power and union of the Eldar and came back to Angband, leaving behind at the time but few servants, and those of less might and cunning. Now Felagund learned from Beor that there were many other men of like mind who were also journeying westward. Others of my own kin have crossed the mountains, he said, and they are wandering not far away. And the Haladin, a people from whom we are sundered in speech, are still in the valleys on the eastern slopes, awaiting tidings before they venture further. There are yet other men whose tongue is more like to ours, with whom we have had dealings at times. They were before us on the westward march, but we passed them, for they are a numerous people, and yet keep together and move slowly, being all ruled by one chieftain whom they call Marak. So that's, 3 groups of men? Now the green elves of Osiriand were troubled by the coming of men, and when they heard that a lord of the Eldar from over the sea was among them, they sent messengers to Felagund. Lord, they said, if you have power over these newcomers, bid them return by the ways they came, or else to go forward. For we desire no strangers in this land to break the peace of which we live. And these folks are hewers of trees and hunters of beasts. Therefore we are their unfriends, and if they will not depart, we shall afflict them in all ways that we can. Then by the advice of Felagund, Beor gathered all the wandering families and kindreds of his people, and they removed over Gelion, and took up their abode in the lands of Amrod and Amras, upon the east banks of the Kiln, south of Nan Elmoth, near to the borders of Doriath. And the name of that land thereafter was Estolad, the encampment. But when after a year had passed, Felagund wished to return to his own country, Beor begged leave to come with him, and he remained in the service of the king of Nagathrond while his life lasted. In this way he got his name, Beor, whereas his name before had been Balan, for Beor signified vassal in the tongue of his people. The rule of his folks he committed to Baran, his eldest son, and he did not return again to Estelad. When you love an elf so much you leave your entire family and clan to spend the rest of your life with him, and you name yourself vassal because that's what you are to him. The coming of the men into the west, aka men bow down to your elven betters. Yeah, he has a habit, I think, of writing men as being incredibly, like, overcome with emotion with elves, like, almost being in love with them or loving them like minor deities. That changes later, I think, but in the very early times when nothing bad's happened yet, they do seem to be like, these guys are so pretty, oh my god, you know. Soon after the departure of Felagund and the other men of whom Beor had spoken also came into Beleriand. First came the Haladin, but meeting the unfriendship of the Green Elves, they turned north and dwelt in Thargelion, in the country of Caranthir, son of Fëanor. There for a time they had peace, and the people of Caranthir paid little heed to them. In the next year, Marak led his people over the mountains. They were a tall and warlike folk, marching in ordered companies, and the elves of Assyrian hid themselves and did not waylay them. But Marak, hearing of the people of Beor were dwelling in a green and fertile land, came down the dwarf road, and settled in the country south and east of the dwellings of Baran, son of Beor, and there was great friendship between these peoples. Felagund himself often returned to visit men, and many other elves out of the Westlands, both Noldor and Sindar, journeyed to Estelad, being eager to see the Edain, whose coming had long been foretold. Now Etani, the second people, was the name given to men in Valinor in the lore that told of their coming, but in the speech of Beleriand their name became Edain, and it was there used only of the three kindreds of the elf friends. Fingolfin, as king of all the Noldor, sent messengers of welcome to find them, and then many young and eager men of the Edain went away and took service with the kings and lords of the Eldar. Among them was Malak, son of Marak, and he dwelt in Hithlum for 14 years, and he learned the Elven tongue and was given the name of Aradan. Yeah, well, nothing bad has happened with men yet, Akatsuki. The men have just shown up and see that the elves look all pretty and nice, and they have no reason to dislike them yet. The Edain did not long dwell content in Estelad, for many still desired to go westward, but they did not know the way. Before them lay the fences of Doriath, and southward lay Sirion and its impassable fens. Therefore the kings of the three houses of the Noldor, seeing hope of strength in the sons of men, sent word that any of the Edain that wished might remove and come to dwell among their people. In this way the migration of the Edain began, at first little by little, but later in families and kindreds they arose and left Estelad, until after some 50 years many thousands had entered the lands of the kings. Most of these took the long road northward, until the ways became well known to them. The people of Beor came to Darthonion and dwelt in lands ruled by the house of Finarfin. The people of Aradan, for Marak his father remained in Estelad until his death, for the most part went on westward, and some came to Hithlum. But Maegor, son of Aradan, and many of the people passed down Sirion into Beleriand, and dwelt a while in the vales of the southern slopes of arid Wethrin. It is said that in all these matters none save Finrod Felagund took counsel with King Thingol, and he was ill pleased, both for that reason, and because he was troubled by dreams concerning the comings of men, ere ever the first tidings of them were heard. Therefore he commanded that men should take no lands to dwell in save in the north, and that the princes whom they served should be answerable for all that they did. And he said, Into Doriath shall no man come while my realm lasts, not even those of the house of Beor who serve Finrod the Beloved. Melian said nothing to him at that time, but afterwards she said to Galadriel, Now the world runs on swiftly to great tidings, and one of men, even of Beor's house, shall indeed come, and the girdle of Melian shall not restrain him, for doom greater than my power shall send him. And the songs that shall spring forth from that coming shall endure when all Middle-earth is changed. But many men remained in Estelad, and there was still a mingled people living there long after, until in the ruin of Beleriand they were overwhelmed or fled back into the east. For beside the old who deemed that their wandering days were over, there were not a few who desired to go their own ways, and they feared the Eldar in the light of their eyes. And then dissensions awoke among the Edain, in which the shadow of Morgoth may be discerned. For certain it is that he knew of the coming of men into Beleriand and of their growing friendship with the elves. The leaders of discontent were Bereg of the house of Beor and Amlak, one of the grandsons of Marak, and they said openly, We took long roads desiring to escape the perils of Middle-earth and the dark things that dwell there, for we heard there was light in the west. But now we learn that the light is beyond the sea. Thither we cannot come where the gods dwell in bliss. Save one, for the Lord of the Dark is here before us, and the Eldar, wise but fell, who make endless war upon him. In the north he dwells, they say, and there is pain and death from which we fled. We will not go that way. Then a council and assembly of men was called, and great numbers came together. And the elf friends answered Bereg, saying, Truly from the Dark King come all the evils from which we fled, but he seeks dominion over all Middle-earth, and whither now shall we turn that he will not pursue us, unless he be vanquished here, or at least held in leaguer? Only by the valor of the Eldar is he restrained, and maybe it was for this purpose, to aid them at need, that we were brought into this land. To this Bereg answered, Let the Eldar look to it. Our lives are short enough. But there arose one who seemed to all to be Amlak's son of Imlach, speaking fell words that shook the hearts of all who heard him. All this is but elvish lore, tales to beguile newcomers that are unwary. The sea has no shore. There is no light in the west. You have followed a fool fire of the elves to the end of the world. Which of you has seen the least of the gods? Who has beheld the Dark King in the north? Those who seek the dominion of Middle-earth are the Eldar. Greedy for wealth, they have delved in the earth for its secrets, and have stirred to wrath the things that dwell beneath it, as they have ever done and shall ever. Let the orcs have the realm that is theirs, and we will have ours. There is room in the world if the Eldar will let us be. Then those that listened sat for a while astounded, and a shadow of fear fell on their hearts. But they resolved to depart far from the lands of the Eldar. But afterwards Amlak returned among them, and denied that he had been present at their debate, or had spoken such words as they reported. And there was doubt and bewilderment among men. Then the elf friends said, You will now believe this at least. There is indeed a Dark Lord, and his spies and emissaries are among us, for he fears us, and the strength that we may give to his foes. But some still answered, He hates us. Rather, and ever the more longer we dwell here, meddling in his quarrel with the kings of the Eldar to no gain of ours. Many therefore of those that yet remained in Esselad made ready to depart, and Bereg led 1,000 of the people of Beor away southwards, and they passed out of the songs of those days. But Amlak repented, saying, I now have a quarrel of my own with this master of lies, which will last to my life's end. And he went away north and entered the service of Maedhros. But those of his people who were of like mind with Bereg chose a new leader, and they went back over the mountains into Eriador and were forgotten. So the men all came together like, hey, what should we do about this? You know, we were trying to get to the place where there's no death and sorrow and stuff, but we can't get there. We haven't met any of the gods. The elves say there's this one dark god trying to kill our asses, but we've never seen him. You know, what are we gonna do? And somebody speaks up and says, maybe the elves are horrible and lying and blah, blah. And it turns out, of course, that's a fake. The guy that supposedly said all that wasn't even at the meeting. And so that changes some people's opinions and makes them go, oh, there is a douchebag fucking with everybody. Maybe we should stop him. But a lot of the humans don't want anything to do with it, so they just leave. During this time, the Haladin remained in Thargelion and were content. But Morgoth, seeing that by lies and deceit he could not wholly estrange elves and men, was filled with wrath, and endeavored to do men what hurt he could. Therefore he sent out an orc raid, and passing east it escaped the leaguer, and came in stealth back over Ered Linden by the passes of the Dwarf Road, and fell upon the Haladin in the southern woods of the land of Caranthir. Now the Haladin did not live under the rule of lords or many together, but each homestead was set apart and governed its own affairs, and they were slow to unite. But there was among them a man named Haldad, who was masterful and fearless. And he gathered all the men he could find, and retreated to the angle of land between Asgar and Gelion, and in the utmost corner he built a stockade across from water to water. Behind it they hid all the women and children they could save. There they were besieged until their food was gone. Haldad had twin children, Haleth his daughter, and Haldar his son, and both were valiant in the defense, for Haleth was a woman of great heart and strength. But at last Haldad was slain in a sortie against the orcs, and Haldar, who rushed out to save his father's body from their butchery, was hewn down beside him. Then Haleth led the people together, and though they were without hope, and some cast themselves into the rivers and were drowned. But 7 days later, as the orcs made their last assault and had already broken through the stockade, there came suddenly a music of trumpets, and Caranthir with his hosts came down from the north and drove the orcs into the rivers. There Caranthir looked kindly upon men and did Haleth great honor. He offered her recompense for her father and brother, and seeing overlate what valor there was in the Edain, he said to her, "If you will remove and dwell further north, there you shall have the friendship and protection of the Eldar and free lands of your own." But Haleth was proud and unwilling to be guided or ruled, and most of the Haladin were of like mood. Therefore she thanked Caranthir, but answered, "My mind is now set, Lord, to leave the shadows of the mountains and go west, whither others of our kin have gone." When therefore the Haladin had gathered all whom they could find alive of their folk who had fled wild into the woods before the orcs, and had gleaned what remained of their goods and their burned homesteads, they took Haleth for their chief, and she led them at last to Estelad and dwelt there for a time. I love Haleth. She's so badass. Ugh. Whenever they do finally make this into a TV show on Amazon, I can't wait to see Haleth. They remained a people apart, and were ever known to the elves and men as the people of Haleth. Haleth remained their chief while her days lasted, but she did not wed, and the headship afterwards passed to Haldan, son of Haldar, her brother. Soon, however, Haleth desired to move westward again, and though most of her people were against this counsel, she led them forth once more, and they went without help or guidance of the Eldar. Passing over Selon and Eros, they journeyed in the perilous land between the mountains of Terror and the girdle of Melian. That land was even then not yet so evil as it became, but it was no road for mortal men to take without aid, and Haleth only brought her people through it with hardship and loss, constraining them to go forward by the strength of her will. At last they crossed over the Brithiac, and many bitterly repented of their journey, but there was now no returning. Therefore, in new lands they went back to their old life as best they could, and they dwelt in free homesteads in the woods of Talath Dernan beyond Maeglin, and some wandered far into the realm of Nagathrond. But there were many who loved the Lady Haleth, and wished to go whither she would, and dwell under her rule, and these she led into the forest of Brethil, between Maeglin and Sirion. Thither in the evil days that followed, many of her scattered folk returned. Oh, it's going to be Numenor? Okay. Well, that's cool, too. I haven't heard any news about it in a long time. I imagine it's not quite finished cooking. Now, Brethil was claimed as part of his realm by King Thingol, though it was not within the girdle of Melian, and he would have denied it to Haleth. But Felagund, who had the friendship of Thingol, hearing of all that had befallen the people of Haleth, obtained his grace for her, that she should dwell free in Brethil, upon the condition that only her people should guard the crossings of Maeglin against all enemies of the Eldar, and allow no orcs to enter their woods. To this Haleth answered, "Where are Haldad my father and Haldar my brother? If the king of Doriath fears a friendship between Haleth and those who devoured her kin, then the thoughts of the Eldar are strange to men." And Haleth dwelt in Brethil until she died, and her people raised a green mound over her in the heights of the forest, Tur Haretha, the Lady Barrow, Hod and Arwen in the Sindarin tongue. What a badass. I love her so much. In this way it came to pass that the Edain dwelt in the lands of the Eldar. Some here, some there, some wandering, some settled in kindreds of small peoples, and the most part of them soon learned the grey elven tongue, both as a common speech among themselves, and because many were eager to learn the lore of the elves. But after a time, the elf kings, seeing it was not good for elves and men to dwell mingled, fusing words together, to dwell mingled together without order, and that men needed lords of their own kind, set regions apart where men could live their own lives, and appointed chieftains to hold these lands freely. They were the allies of the Eldar in war, but marched under their own leaders. Yet many of the Edain had delight in the friendship of the elves, and dwelt among them for so long as they had leave, and the young men often took service for a time in the hosts of the kings. Now Hador Lorindol, son of Hathor, son of Magor, son of Malak Aradan, entered the household of Fingolfin in his youth, and was loved by the king. Fingolfin therefore gave to him the lordship of Dor-Lomin, and into that land he gathered most of the people of his kin, and became the mightiest of the chieftains of the Edain. In his house only the elven tongue was spoken, but their own speech was not forgotten, and from it came the common tongue of Numenor. But in Dorthonion the lordship of the people of Beor and the country of Ladros was given to Boromir, son of Borin, who was the grandson of Beor the Old. The sons of Hador were Galdor and Gundor, and the sons of Galdor were Hurin and Huor, and the son of Hurin was Turin, the bane of Galrung, and the son of Huor was Turor, father of Arendil the Blessed. The son of Boromir was Bregor, whose sons were Bregolas and Barahir, and the sons of Bregolas were Baragund and Belagund. The daughter of Baragund was Morwen, the mother of Turin, and the daughter of Belagund was Rian, the mother of Tuor. But the son of Barahir was Baron One-Hand, who won the love of Luthien Thingol's daughter, and returned from the dead. And from them came Elwing, the wife of Arendelle, and all the kings of Numenor after. All these were caught in the net of the doom of the Noldor, and they did great deeds when the Eldar remember still among the histories of the kings of old. And in those days the strength of men were added to the power of the Noldor, and their hope was high. And Morgoth was straitly enclosed, for the people of Hador, being hardy to endure cold and long wandering, feared not at times to go far into the north, and there keep watch upon the movements of the enemy. The men of the three houses throve and multiplied, but greatest among them was the house of Hador Goldenhead, peer of the elven lords. His people were of great strength and stature, ready in mind, bold and steadfast, quick to anger and to laugh, mighty among the children of Iluvatar in the youth of mankind. Yellow-haired they were for the most part, and blue-eyed, but not so was Turin, whose mother was Morwen of the house of Beor. The men of that house were dark or brown of hair, with grey eyes, and of all men they were most like to the Noldor, and most loved by them. For they were eager of mind, cunning-handed, swift in understanding, long in memory, and they were moved sooner to pity than to laughter. Like to them were the woodland folk of Haleth, but they were of lesser statue and less eager for lore. They used few words and did not love great concourse of men, and many among them delighted in solitude, wandering free in the greenwoods while the wonder of the lands of the Eldar were new upon them. But in the realms of the west their time was brief, and their days unhappy. The years of the Edain were lengthened, according to the reckoning of men, after their coming to Beleriand. But at last Beor the Old died, when he had lived 93 years, for 44 of which he had served King Felagund. And when he lay dead, of no wound or grief, but stricken by age, the Eldar saw for the first time the swift waning of the life of men, and the death of weariness which they knew not in themselves, and they grieved greatly for the loss of their friends. But Beor at the last had relinquished his life willingly and passed in peace, and the Eldar wondered much at the strange fate of men, for in all their lore there was no account of it, and its end was hidden from them. Nonetheless, the Edain of old learned swiftly of the Eldar all such art and knowledge as they could receive, and their sons increased in wisdom and skill, until they far surpassed all others of mankind, who dwelt still east of the mountains and had not seen the Eldar, nor looked upon the faces that had beheld the light of Valinor. Whew! Hello, Trusted Siren. Thank you for joining us right as we're closing up for the day. Those were 2 long chapters, so we're going to have to call it there, but thank you for joining me. We will continue next Wednesday with, Chapter 18 of The Ruin of Beleriand and the Fall of Fingolfin. Ooh, that sounds fun. Ooh, that sounds like it'll be great, and I'm sure only good things will happen. Thank you for joining me. I will be back in an hour to do Fatal Frame, and tomorrow will be more Fatal Frame and the Untamed TV show watching and all that jazz. Follow me on social media if you'd like, and join the Discord if you want to hang out, watch TV with us, joke, laugh, goof off. Those links are in the description. You can support the channel if you like what I do and get some really cool benefits. There's a document in the description that lists all the extra stuff you get, and it helps me to support the channel and do cool new stuff. I think that's everything, so thanks again for joining me, and hopefully I'll see some of y'all in an hour for Fatal Frame. Bye.